Little Nightmares is a surreal story about our small protagonist called Six. Six wears an iconic yellow raincoat, traversing across a world clearly not suited for her, being made for larger entities. Despite that, there are certain parts in this world which are specifically designed for smaller entities to pass through. One could even say, adapted for children like Six. It doesn't take long before we learn Six is trapped in a massive watercraft which inhabits certain monster-like large humanoids, welcoming a large number of guests to give in to gluttony, overeating to the point of no return, while children trapped and caged in this place starve and are literally made into food to feed these monsters. With Little Nightmares 3 around the corner, expanding on this mysterious universe, there's no better time than now to play through Little Nightmares 1 and explore its secrets once more. Luckily, you can play Little Nightmares 1 on your mobile devices now, which was released on 15th of December last year, available on both Android and iOS. Thanks to Little Nightmares sponsoring this video, which you can now access by clicking on the links in the description or what you see on the screen. After weeks of theorizing and making videos, we finally got confirmation from the creators of the game that Little Nightmares 1 is a direct sequel to Little Nightmares 2, so all the events taking place in the Maw follow directly after what Six and Mono experienced in the Pale City, and of course the controversial betrayal of Six, which made her find her way to the Maw. As a quick summary, Mono saves and frees Six from the confinement that she was in after being captured by the Hunter. The Hunter seems to be a lonely entity who has a hobby of doing taxidermy. Therefore, he enjoys killing and preserving humans in different shapes, making them reenact different scenarios, such as dining, for example. His motives are unclear, and he covers his face with a sack, only having one eye hole, with not much more known about him. There have been many speculations of who he might be, but let's just cut it in here, and enough about him. As Mono frees Six, he alongside her traverse across the sinister Pale City, facing off hostile beings such as the brain-dead viewers, the strict and unforgiving teacher, the naughty bullies, horrifying reanimated patient, the psychotic doctor, and eventually the Thin Man, who turns out to be Mono from the future. Thin Man seems to have a clear motive, to capture Six and not let her free, as she will be the one trapping Mono in the domain of the eye, where he spends a lifetime waiting and waiting to repeat the cycle. After Mono is betrayed by Six and subsequently trapped with the ever-watching eye, Six goes on with her life, where her gut-wrenching hunger strikes, with the new dark shadow entity pulling the strings seemingly and manipulating Six to consume whatever she gets her hands on. That's when she is introduced to the Maw, a food haven where gluttony is praised and encouraged, with anyone welcome to feed non-stop. Of course, this is not without any payback, as I have a theory that the guests are fed like cattle so that they can be drained of their life force by the Lady of the Maw, who uses the guests to feed on in her own way. It's unclear how Six finds her way into the Maw, but by the looks of it, it's possible that she snuck into one of the suitcases of the guests and smuggled herself into it, as children don't seem to be welcome here, as they are usually hunted and brought to this place in order to be slaughtered and prepared to be fed to the guests. It's a cruel cycle for feeding. The stray children who are severely hunted are brought to the place so that they can be fed to the guests, who are then used like cattle to feed the lady, who uses their life forces. For Six, however, her entire purpose of coming to the Maw was to feed, as she had a never-ending hunger, not stopping her from eating anything that she gets her hands on. As time progresses and her shadow grows darker and stronger, she develops a taste for live beings, and eventually gnomes who once were children, and eventually the Lady of the Maw. Through consuming her, Six manages to obtain her powers, allowing her to drain anyone of their life force and essentially replace her need of consuming entities through using her digestive system and mouth, now being dependent on consuming live beings' life forces. That's what we see towards the end of the game, where Six assumes the role of the new Lady of the Maw, getting exactly what she wanted. A haven where she can sustain herself for the foreseeable future, feeding her dark shadow as much as she desires, but effectively giving in to her darkness and losing herself. I've had a theory since I started going over the Little Nightmares lore that just how we observe Mono turning into the Thin Man and the Thin Man having his last struggles with Mono before losing and dying, Six also kills the lady to become her, with a cycle repeating itself. The difference, however, is that the Thin Man actively tried to stop repeating the same cycle over and over again, with no success, with every time losing to Mono. But for Six and the lady, she never tried actively stopping Six from killing her and claiming her position as the leader of the Maw. The lady simply stayed in the Maw and tried to protect it from a younger version of herself with not much luck. Therefore, with a steady flow of guests who keep coming to the Maw with full ships, Six has a steady flow of food to satiate or satisfy her ever-hungry shadow. We see her patiently waiting outside of the Maw, waiting for a new ship to unload its many guests. In Little Nightmares 1, we observe how the lady has a big weakness which brings her to her knees, weakening her, which allows a much less capable Six defeat her and eventually consume her. Her weakness is looking into mirrors, which after seeing her being unmasked, we understand why. The lady is a deformed monster herself under the mask, which could be the future of Six when she grows older. It is something the lady despises to see and is afraid of, as we see how she has smashed all the mirrors in her quarters. Is a possibility losing the control to the shadow entity slowly deformed her into a monster, almost resembling the deformed guests who overindulge in eating children's flesh. So maybe it is the consequence of eating the children's meat and being such monstrous beings that transforms and descends them into such monsters, as we also see how the viewers in Little Nightmares 2 deform into brain-dead entities, slowly getting sucked into the televisions. So after weeks and weeks of theorizing, it is clear that Six was determined to go to the Maw in order to satisfy her sinister hunger, something that seems to appear only after meeting Mono. Something that could fortify that theory is that she was imprisoned in a room by the hunter, which seems to be for some time. If she had her hunger bouts, she would possibly starve or die, as she wouldn't have anything to eat while being imprisoned, unless if the hunter fed her. Nonetheless, while exploring the Pale City, she doesn't get her hunger bouts, and the shadow entity doesn't appear only until after she is kidnapped by the Thin Man. So, is it a possibility that the Thin Man accidentally was the creator of the Shadow Six, which in turn seems to be the orchestrator who manipulates Six to betray Mono so that she can go to the Maw to satisfy her uncontrollable needs? There's a paradox that many of the present events to take place depend on events that are to take place in the future, which themselves depend on the very present events. For example, if the Thin Man, a product of the current events, wouldn't go to the past to kidnap Six and try to stop his doomed future from happening, the current events would take a different turn and as a result would produce a different outcome and future. If the Thin Man wouldn't kidnap Six and take her to the signal tower, Mono wouldn't follow them there, which would in turn lead to Six betraying him, dropping to the abyss below, being trapped with the Eye for when he is ready to be released. So the current events all seem to rely on future events to happen, so they would come back in time and allow the current events happen. That makes me think, what would happen if the newly grown Mono, the new Thin Man, wouldn't travel back in time and kidnap Six and face off a younger Mono? Does he actually have a say in any of it, or is he now a mindless pawn played by the Eye, so he can play his role in order for the perfect loop to keep on happening? There's no question many children in Little Nightmares universe have special powers. Mono is one of them. But the question remains, are they born naturally like that, or do they obtain their powers in different ways? It's never disclosed to how Mono obtained his powers, but in the comics, we see him cowering in a broken TV, followed by an obscured figure, which leads to a squashing hitting sound, with Mono finding himself in the wilderness, the domain of the hunter, right in front of a TV, which could potentially mean he teleported there. So, is it possible that he obtained his powers here from an ambiguous figure who followed him, which seems to be the Thin Man? Is it possible the Thin Man, in order to complete the loop, comes from the future and gifts him his transmissional powers? It seems as if the Eye is the orchestrator of all these mishaps and unfortunate series of events, causing Mono to gain his powers and battle his future self, just to repeat the same loop so he can cause Six to get her dark shadow powers as well, in order to go to the Maw and become the Lady. Maybe the Eye is the overseer and it feeds on people's misery and the suffering that it puts them through, gifting them certain powers in the process in order to create this chaos. There are still many unanswered mysteries in the universe of Little Nightmares, and it all started with the beautifully crafted Little Nightmares 1. Make sure to follow the links on the screen or click on them in the description below to access the mobile version of the game on Android and iOS devices. Whether on PC or with the ease of playing it on mobile devices, there are many more secrets which need exploring. The team behind Little Nightmares have been kind enough to give me several access keys to download the game for free, which I will give at random to some of you folks who have commented on this video. This brings us to the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to stay tuned for more by hitting on the subscribe button and the notification bell. As always, it's been your host Star, and I will see you on the next one. Have a fantastic day.